The wind came hard out of the north that Christmas Eve, cutting across the forgotten trails like a blade. Snow chased itself along the ground, hissing against frozen grass and the gray boards of an old west town that had learned long ago not to expect mercy. Lamps burned low behind narrow windows, and smoke from chimneys rose straight and thin as if the cold itself pressed it down. Out beyond the last hitching post, a woman walked alone, her steps slow, her breath ragged, her shawl stiff with ice. She had not planned to be there. Frontier life rarely followed plans, especially for those without a man's name to shield them. Her boots were cracked, her fingers numb, and each step sent pain up her legs. The night had already claimed one horse from the livery and nearly claimed her child weeks before, back when the river broke its banks and took her cabin with it. Since then, she had moved like a shadow from place to place, trading labor for bread, silence for shelter. On this night, even that had failed her. The old west town slept behind her, doors shut tight against both wind and strangers. Christmas meant warmth for some and memory for others. For her, it meant only the fear that the cold might finally win. She pressed a hand to her belly where hunger ached, and another to the small bundle tied close beneath her coat. The child did not stir. That frightened her more than the wind. Beyond the town stood a ranch half hidden by drifting snow and cottonwoods stripped bare. It belonged to a man who kept to himself, a cowboy known more by his silence than his deeds. Folks said he had ridden with scouts once, following Native American trails across high country where few whites dared to go. Others said he had buried a wife and never spoke her name again. What was certain was that his land still stood when others failed, and that his lights burned even on the coldest nights. She had passed that ranch before and kept walking, pride heavier than her bundle. Tonight, pride had no place. Her knees buckled near the fence line, and she caught herself on a frozen post, splinters biting her palm. Tears came then, hot against her cheeks, stolen away by the wind before they could fall. She whispered a prayer she had learned as a girl, back when her mother's voice still filled the room and winter did not mean death. Inside the house, the rancher sat alone. The fire had burned down to coals, but he had not risen to feed it. Christmas had always been a quiet thing for him. The land did not mark holidays, and neither did he. His thoughts drifted along old paths, back to days of dust and blood, to promises made and broken, to a woman with dark hair who once waited for him at dusk. Frontier life taught a man to live with ghosts, but it did not teach him how to be free of them. The knock came soft at first, nearly lost beneath the wind. He might have ignored it, thinking it no more than a branch striking the door. Then it came again, weak but desperate. His hand went to the rifle by habit, then paused. Something in that sound did not belong to danger. He opened the door, and the cold rushed in like a living thing. She stood there swaying, her face pale, her eyes wide with fear and resolve. Snow clung to her skirt and lashes. For a long moment they only looked at each other, two souls measuring the cost of mercy. He saw at once that she would not last the night. She saw in his eyes a hardness shaped by loss, not cruelty. She did not beg at first. Pride still lingered, thin but stubborn. She asked only for warmth, for a place to sit until the storm passed. Her voice shook, but it did not break. He hesitated, glancing past her at the darkness beyond as if weighing old rules against the simple truth before him. At last he stepped aside and let her in. The heat of the room struck her like a blow. Her legs gave way, and he caught her before she fell. She smelled of snow and smoke, of long roads and tired hope. He set her near the fire, wrapped her hands in a blanket, and brought water. Only then did he notice the child, small and quiet, tucked close. His jaw tightened. He had known children once, or thought he had before the earth took them back. As feeling crept painfully into her fingers, words spilled out. She told him of the cabin lost to the river, of the town that turned her away, of the work that dried up when winter came early. She spoke of nights spent listening for wolves and mornings spent wondering if she would wake at all. It was a tale as old as the land, a Western survival story written again and again along forgotten trails. He listened without comment. Silence had always been his way. Yet something shifted as she spoke, something he had buried deep beneath years of routine. The fire cracked, the wind howled, and outside, the world pressed close, reminding them both how small a single life could be. When she finished, she looked at him with a steady gaze that held more than fear, it held choice. She told him she could work, could cook and mend, could earn her keep when spring came. Then, after a long pause, she said the words that made his breath catch. She said she would stay as his wife if that was the only way he would let her remain. The room went still. In that moment hung more than an offer. It carried loneliness, longing, and the weight of a Wild West love story yet to be told. He saw the danger in it, the way such a choice could cut deeper than any knife. He also saw the truth of the frontier, where survival often wore the shape of vows spoken too soon. Outside, the storm showed no sign of easing. Inside, the fire burned low. He had to choose before the night chose for them both. He did not answer her at once. The words she had spoken seemed to hang in the air, heavier than the smoke from the hearth. Outside, the wind rattled the shutters, as if the land itself waited to hear what he would say. He turned back to the fire, added a log with slow care, and let the flames rise before facing her again. In the Old West, a man learned that some choices could not be taken back, no matter how quietly they were made. She watched him from the edge of the chair, her hands wrapped around the tin cup he had given her. The warmth seeped into her bones, stirring aches she had kept buried through long weeks of cold. She did not look at the door anymore. She knew she would not survive if he sent her back into the night. Yet she would not plead again? Frontier life had stripped her down to what mattered, and dignity was one of the few things she still owned. He asked her name at last, his voice low and even. She gave it without adornment, the sound of it plain and worn from use. She asked for his in return, and he hesitated before answering, as if he had not spoken it aloud in years. Names carried weight in an Old West town. They carried memory and sometimes blame. The cabin was simple, built by his own hands when the ranch was young. Each beam held a story, each scar in the wood a reminder of winters survived and summers burned dry. A pair of moccasins hung near the door, a quiet trace of the Native American woman who had once guided him through mountain passes when he was green and foolish. He had learned much from her, not least of all how to listen to the land. He had learned less about how to keep what he loved. She noticed the small details, the careful order, the way he had set the cup within her reach without comment. It told her he was not unkind, only guarded. She had known men like that before, men shaped by loss who believed distance was the same as strength. Her own life had been carved by similar hands. She had buried a husband under a cottonwood with no marker but a stone. She had buried dreams beside him and carried on because the child in her arms had no one else. As the fire settled, he spoke of his past in pieces, never fully, like a trail broken by snow. He had come west chasing work and quiet, thinking the wide land might dull old regrets. Instead, it had sharpened them. He spoke of cattle lost to storms, of nights spent riding fence while the stars watched in silence. He did not speak of the woman he had loved until she asked, gently, without pressing. When he did, his eyes stayed on the fire. She listened, understanding more than he knew. She had lived among Native American families for a season after her husband died, learned how grief could sit beside daily life without being named. She had learned that survival did not always mean healing. Sometimes it meant only waking again. The child stirred then, a soft sound that cut through the quiet. He stiffened, not from fear, but from memory. Children had once filled his days with noise and questions. The land had taken them in a single hard winter and his wife soon after. Since then, he had kept his world narrow, believing that fewer ties meant fewer wounds. Now, in one night, that careful order threatened to unravel. He asked what had driven her to speak such a promise. She told him the truth, plain and unadorned. The town would not shelter a woman alone for long. A child without a father drew whispers and hard looks. Work was scarce and winter unforgiving. A wife, even in name alone, had standing. It was not romance she offered, but a bargain shaped by Western survival. He understood that logic all too well. The frontier ran on such quiet agreements, spoken between storms and sealed by necessity. Yet he also knew how such arrangements could turn sour, how the weight of expectation could crush fragile trust. He had seen men take wives out of loneliness and lose them to bitterness. He had sworn he would not do the same. The night deepened. Snow piled against the walls, muting the world beyond. They shared a simple meal, eaten in silence broken only by the child's soft breathing. Each watched the other from the corner of an eye, measuring, wondering. The distance between them was small in space, vast in experience. She spoke then of the land she had lost, of a promise made by a man who never returned from a cattle drive. She spoke of an old west town that turned cold when fortune did. Her voice did not tremble, she had spent her tears already. What remained was resolve sharpened by hardship. He told her of threats that lingered on the edges of his land. Rustlers who watched from the hills, a neighbor who claimed a line that was not his, a debt owed from years past that had not been forgotten. A woman under his roof would not be shielded from those dangers. If anything, she would stand closer to them. She met his gaze without flinching. Danger was not new to her. It rode every forgotten trail she had walked. She said only that fear had not kept her alive this long. Work had, endurance had. The fire burned lower again. He added another log, aware of how the simple act mirrored the choice before him. To let the flames die would mean sending her back into the night. To feed them would bind her fate to his, in some measure, whether he wished it or not. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying with it the distant howl of something wild. The land listened as it always did. Inside, two lives balanced on a moment neither had planned. The promise she had offered remained unanswered, a fragile bridge over a deep and uncertain divide. Morning came slow and gray, as if the land itself hesitated to wake. Snow still fell, lighter now, drifting down in a quiet curtain that softened every edge. The ranch lay hushed beneath it, fences bowed, trees bent in patient surrender. Inside the cabin, the fire had burned through the night, fed by a man who slept little and a woman who slept only in fragments. She woke first, her body stiff, her mind racing. For a moment she did not know where she was, only that she was warm. That alone felt dangerous. Warmth invited hope, and hope had a way of cutting deep when taken away. She sat up carefully, not wishing to wake him or the child curled close beside her. The cabin looked different by daylight, less threatening, more honest. Every mark on the walls told of labor, not cruelty. He stood at the window when she noticed him, looking out across the snow-covered yard. His shoulders were set, his posture alert, as if the land might speak to him at any moment. He had been that way since dawn, watching the sky, listening for sounds that did not belong. The frontier taught a man to trust silence only briefly. They shared a simple breakfast. Words came slowly, careful, and few. Each felt the weight of the night before pressing into the new day. The promise she had offered still lay between them, unclaimed yet impossible to ignore. She wondered if he would send her away once the storm passed. He wondered if letting her stay would invite a different kind of ruin. As the day wore on, the work could not be ignored. Animals needed tending, water needed breaking free from ice. He told her she could rest, but she rose anyway, tying her shawl tight and stepping into the cold. He watched her from the doorway, surprised by the way she moved with quiet purpose. Frontier life had shaped her as surely as it had shaped him. Working side by side brought moments neither expected. A shared glance when a gate stuck. A brief brush of hands when passing a tool. Each small closeness carried both comfort and fear. He felt the old ache stirring, the one he had buried beneath years of routine. She felt the pull of something steadier than survival, something that frightened her more than hunger ever had. Beyond the ranch, trouble gathered like a low cloud. A rider passed along the distant ridge, watching too closely. He noticed and stiffened, memory sharpening his senses. The land was never truly empty. Forgotten trails carried more than ghosts. They carried men who believed the frontier owed them something. That evening, a neighbor arrived without invitation. His eyes lingered too long, his smile thin as wire. He spoke of boundaries and rumors, of a woman seen on the ranch and questions already forming in the old west town. His words were polite, but his meaning was not. A woman under a man's roof invited judgment, and judgment often brought danger. She felt the weight of that gaze and lowered her eyes, anger burning beneath the surface. She had known such looks all her life, the way a woman's worth could be measured and dismissed in the same breath. He noticed her tension and stepped slightly in front of her, a small gesture that sent a ripple through them both. After the neighbor left, silence settled heavy once more. She asked if her presence would cause him trouble. He did not answer right away. Truth pressed hard against his ribs. Trouble had found him long before she arrived. Yet he could not deny that her staying might draw it closer. Night fell again, quieter than the one before. They sat near the fire, the child asleep between them. The flames cast shifting light across his face, revealing lines carved by years of sun and wind. She studied him openly now, seeing not just a rancher, but a man worn thin by holding himself apart from the world. He spoke of the choices that haunted him, of moments when fear had kept him silent when words might have saved something precious. He did not ask for forgiveness. He did not expect understanding. Yet she offered it anyway, simply by listening. She shared her own doubts, her fear that accepting his shelter might bind her to a life shaped by someone else's sorrow. She had lived in the shadow of loss before. She was not sure she could do so again. Yet the thought of leaving stirred a different kind of ache, one she did not yet have words for. Later, as the fire dimmed, he laid out a bed for her and the child near the hearth. He took his place farther off, as he had the night before. Distance felt safer, though it did little to quiet the thoughts that chased sleep away. He listened to her breathing, steady and close, and felt the weight of what he risked by caring at all. In the dark, she lay awake, staring at the low ceiling. She wondered if she had mistaken kindness for promise, shelter for belonging. Frontier life blurred such lines, and mistakes were costly. Yet when she closed her eyes, she pictured the way he had stood between her and the neighbor, silent but firm. It was a memory she held close. Outside, the land shifted again. Snow gave way to wind, and with it came the distant sound of hooves. He rose quietly, hand going to his rifle. Old threats stirred and new ones waited just beyond sight. He glanced back once at the woman by the fire, at the child curled safe beside her, and felt the sharp pull of responsibility settle in his chest. The promise remained unspoken, unresolved. Love hovered like a fragile thing, possible yet easily broken. The frontier watched, patient and unforgiving, as two guarded hearts moved closer, knowing the cost of a single misstep could be everything they had left. Dawn broke clear at last, pale light spreading across the ranch as if the land itself had decided to grant a measure of mercy. The night before had brought the reckoning he had long feared, and the choice he could no longer delay. When the riders came out of the dark, they did not come quietly. Hoofs thundered against frozen ground, voices sharp with intent. He had met them at the fence line, rifle steady, heart heavy but resolved. They were not strangers. Old debts and older grudges rode with them, men who believed the frontier still owed them what they had lost. Words were exchanged, harsh and edged with threat. Yet the land had a way of settling such matters without blood when courage stood firm. He did not back away. He named the boundaries as they truly were, spoke of witnesses, of consequences, of the simple fact that some things could not be taken by force anymore. The wind carried his voice, strong and certain, and the riders saw something in him they had not expected. One by one, they turned away, leaving only churned snow and silence behind. When he returned to the cabin, the woman stood waiting, the child wrapped close against her. She searched his face for answers before he spoke. He told her simply that the danger had passed, at least for now. She did not ask for more. The frontier had taught her when to accept a truth and when to let it rest. The days that followed unfolded slowly, like a careful mending. Word reached the old west town that the ranch was settled, that the rumors had no teeth. The neighbor kept his distance. Work resumed its steady rhythm, and with it came a sense of belonging neither had expected so soon. She took to the land as if she had always known it, her hands sure, her presence easing the quiet that had once pressed too hard against the walls. In time, he spoke again of her offer, not as a bargain, but as a question. He told her he would not have her bound by necessity alone. If she stayed, it would be because she chose to, because she believed there could be more than survival between them. His voice did not waver, though his heart did. She answered without haste. She spoke of the nights she had spent listening for wolves, of the child's small breath in the dark, of the weariness that came from carrying the world alone. She spoke too of the way the ranch felt different from the places she had known, of the steadiness she saw in him, quiet and unshowy. She said she did not know what the future held, but she knew she no longer wished to face it alone. They stood there in the thin winter light, no witnesses but the land and the child between them. He took her hand, rough fingers closing gently around hers. It was a simple thing, yet it carried the weight of all they had endured. The promise was spoken then, plain and honest, shaped not by desperation but by hope earned through hardship. Spring came slow, as it often did on that stretch of land. Snow retreated inch by inch, revealing grass flattened but alive. Calves were born, fences repaired, and the ranch breathed easier with two souls tending it. The child laughed more, the sound bright against the wide sky. Neighbors began to nod again, then to visit, curiosity softening into acceptance. On a warm evening they stood together at the edge of the property, watching the sun dip low. He spoke of the Native American woman who had once taught him the trails, of the lessons he had carried forward. She listened, understanding the way the past could live alongside the present without ruling it. She told him of her husband, not with tears now, but with quiet respect. Loss no longer stood between them. It stood behind, acknowledged and laid to rest. Their life was not free of hardship. Storms still came, and the land demanded its due. Yet they faced it together, sharing burdens as naturally as breath. Love grew not as a sudden blaze, but as a steady fire, tended day by day. It warmed the cabin in winter and lit the long evenings with simple joys. One night, as another Christmas drew near, snow fell again, gentle this time. They sat by the fire, the child asleep nearby, and listened to the wind pass harmlessly over the roof. He thought of the night she had come to his door, nearly claimed by the cold. She thought of the fear that had driven her steps and the courage that had carried her through. The frontier remained unforgiving, but it had given them something rare, a place to stand, a life built not on forgotten trails but on shared ground. As the fire burned low and peace settled deep, they knew they had survived more than winter. They had found home, and in it a love strong enough to endure the wide and waiting land.